I'm Cheri Haynes. I'm with AXA XL. This morning we heard a lot about the decisions made at the owner, the developer, the finance level, but construction companies are the boots on the ground delivering those promises. So let's talk about that. In this session, we're going to hear from folks who are actually making net zero a reality on projects. We're going to discuss how they've implemented governments across the organization, the various kinds of controls that they need, and how each of their various departments are involved. All right, as I said, I'm Cheri Haynes. I am the head of innovation and sustainability in the construction vertical at AXA XL. We're a large insurance company. We insure many of the people in this room here today, so I'm very delighted to be here with you. And I have here with me Etienne, the Director of Sustainable Construction from Pomerleau. Etienne's commitment to sustainability and innovation in construction is unparalleled. He's got a solid academic foundation in civil engineering from the University of Sherbrooke. His commitment to advancing sustainable design and circular economy also led him to pursue studies in building technology at the Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. And he started at Pomerleau in 2016. He's gained on-site project experience as a project manager, which is always the best foundation to build from, right? And is involved as a strategic initiatives manager and then operations chief of staff. Now he's leading sustainable construction team, part of the broader environment and sustainability team composed of 8 passionate individuals. The team aspires to respond to the growing demand for sustainable certifications like LEED, Passive House, Carbon Zero, and Envision. And they also seek to operationalize the company's ESG strategy through concrete actions on projects and at the corporate level, all while developing expertise in sustainable construction materials and methods to support Pomerleau's teams across the country. And a fun fact about Etienne is that he always hesitated between becoming an engineer and an architect, and he's really proficient with Excel and with projections, but he enjoys putting those into nice, sleek PowerPoint slides even more, and Lord knows we need more of that. Also with me, Audrina, Director of Carbon Transition at Chandos Construction. Her interest in ethical, sustainable development has empowered her to shift from 20 years of architectural practice into the sustainability realm with Chandos. As Director of Carbon Transition, Audrina's objectives are to help shape internal policy, practice, measurement, and research to bring Chandos' goal of net zero 2040 into action. Through her experience in professional practice, Audrina brings a multidisciplinary aspect into her role and is excited to be collaborating with industry partners to build a resilient, low-carbon construction sector. And a fun fact about Audrina, hey, perfect. Perfect timing. Perfect timing. She's learned the hard way that being accident-prone and being a cyclist is not the best combination. So she slows her rides down now with a chariot trailer for her 60-pound dog. And Morgan McDonald, Director of Corporate Sustainability with Ledcor Construction. Morgan's the Director of Corporate Sustainability at Ledcor, one of Canada's most diversified construction companies. He's also the chair of Ledcor's Global Innovation Committee. In previous roles, he led programs related to high-performance buildings and deep energy retrofits. He has a degree in mechanical engineering from Queen's University and a background in renewable energy, carbon finance, and sustainability education. And though he is 6.5 feet tall, he does not play basketball. All right, we'll get started. Each of you are going to highlight a particular project your firm has been or is involved with. And we've got some lovely pictures so that you can see.
So yeah, it's very hard to pick one. So this is one photo that I picked just because it's recent. It's right here in Vancouver. The tallest building and one of the first to pursue Canada Green Building Council's new zero carbon building standard. And we're talking about zero carbon all the time now, but a big building takes a long time. When this was first conceived, more than 5 years ago, that was a radical proposition. And it was Oxford Properties as the owner-developer that stuck their neck out and said, yeah, I think we can do this. And they chose us and a great design team to execute it. At the end of the day, though, not one of the most challenging ones. Challenging the way big buildings are, and it was, there were some issues, how do we lift this enormous equipment, the electrical, being electrically heated, the heat pumps were bigger equipment than is usually hoisted into place. But long before this project, we had some other net zero. We did some, going back almost 15 years now, living building challenge projects here in Vancouver. Not only net zero energy, net zero carbon, operational and embodied, net zero waste, net zero water. I mean, everything you could throw at in terms of sustainability performance. And yeah, they were hard, but we figured it out. And then that set the stage for being able to do all these other buildings and projects that have come along since. And another one I could have picked was a 7-story passive house we did here in Vancouver. Concrete, non-residential, relatively unheard of, at least in North America, for a passive house. But we figured it out. And honestly, the key, I think, to all of these projects is belief that these outcomes are possible. You can't go in thinking this isn't going to work. You have to go in, even if you've never done it before, believe, yes, you can achieve these performance outcomes. Understanding of what the drivers are to get them, because the first run through, the design might not actually be the solution. It might not pencil. There might not be a constructability solution to build it. So you have to understand what drives that performance, because you're going to tweak it and make changes along the way. And then third, effort. It's not going to be as easy as the project you did that had no energy or carbon criteria. You are going to have to put in the extra effort. And finally, trust, which is trust your team. The whole team has a role to play. The owner, the architect, the general contractor, we're all kind of holistic players, but then all the subject matter experts specific to it, each has a role to play. And you have to trust one another. I don't know how to do this. I've never done it before, is the kind of statement that might have to be said around a table, where usually no one says that. Everyone is expected to show up being an expert and knowing exactly what they're going to do. And I've seen those projects fail, where no one was willing to actually admit there was a gap, there was a knowledge gap, there was a solution gap, and they didn't trust their partners to be able to be honest and vulnerable that way. Some of those projects got scrapped. They didn't get built. It never reached a solution that was viable. The ones that do get built are the ones where the people trusted each other and supported each other. It's like, you know what? I have an idea that might work. Tell me if you think this will work. And that's what has led to a number of these fantastic projects. And now they're all precedents that we can all hang our hats on and say, I'm glad I built that. And then regulators can come along and say, see, we have a precedent. Now we can make a policy. Here's an example of how it worked before. Now we can look at a way to make sure everyone has to do something like this. And that's how policy inches forward, is through leading projects that show what is possible.
That's great stuff, Morgan. Audrina, could you say a few words about your project, its goals?
Hi. This one is William Horollack Park. It is a very large 65-hectare development. Well, it's actually rehabilitation. It's through our civil division, but I actually selected this one project to share with everyone because A, it's still under construction, so this is just part of the journey. And the second part is it involves both civil infrastructure, roads, which we never think about how much, carbon or embodied carbon is in roads, and also buildings. And it was an existing project that had so many cool concepts that we could actually bring to the table. Now, we do a lot of projects that do have, the LEED certifications, the zero carbon, but this one is particularly different because it wasn't pursuing any certifications. But what it does celebrate is teamwork, collaboration, and to Morgan's point, real transparency and culture within the team to create really good outcomes. We're looking at this project through a lens of material circularity, looking at what we can do with existing materials there that we can reuse, recycle, salvage. How much can we reduce our footprint through just using what we have? And really considering reuse and minimizing transportation of goods. So I find that this one's going to be really interesting as a research project to A, gather data, B, get our lessons learned from the team, and how much can we take this forward to all our other projects and share it with our industry so that we collectively can make these goals together. It's a really interesting one because it's a collaborative contract. So it's not lump sum. We didn't have to bid and then have a really, really tight budget. It gave us a little bit more room to be flexible with planning early with the design team, really walking through the site, having our builders at the table, looking at the actual condition and saying, what can we do here to A, save money, B, lower the carbon, and C, find extra value for what we're investing into this project. One of the really interesting things, there was a whole lot of existing concrete curbs. I think they estimate about 3,200 cubes of concrete to replace all those curbs. So this was all existing, and that's a lot of material to move. So we actually brought a concrete crusher on site, did the separation on site and crushed it, and reused that material. Currently, you can see at the top of that little parking lot, that's about 2.1 hectares of reused material that we actually saved the cost from the owner, for the owner to pay. And with that savings, not only did we save in disposal fees, I think it would be about $110 a haul. We're looking at also reinvesting that money to build a better assembly that lasts longer with lower maintenance costs. So we're thinking long term. So I think there's a lot of conversation to be had about capital expenditure budgets versus ongoing maintenance budgets and why they're so separate. Because if you can invest a little bit more up front, you can actually see bigger gains throughout the life cycle of that whole assembly or that whole investment. So that's something that we've been tracking, and that's why I brought that project up today.
Very exciting. Etienne, can you tell us about how the desire to reach net zero affected your project?
Sure, thanks. And first of all, I'm really honored to be here today. Also, along with this panel with industry competitors, but also partners. It doesn't happen that often, and it's really important to celebrate that, because even though we have our own objectives or targets and everything, we will not reach these targets alone. We need to collaborate. We talked about collaboration for the projects that we presented, but we need to talk about collaboration for the whole journey as well. Also, I'm honored to be here at UBC because it was one of my 2 picks for architecture, but then I chose the biking instead of the hiking. So that's my take on it. So the project that you see here on the screen is the Ledcor project. So it's a winner project for the C40 Reinventing Cities in Montreal. So we created a team with Cogir, a developer in Montreal, with the CDPQ in Ivanhoe Cambridge, who's their investing arm. And this project is also not a zero carbon building project. We did deliver a zero carbon building project this year in Toronto. It's a sorting facility for Canada Post. But this one is interesting because it has criteria that it's looking for LEED Platinum. It's reaching also KPIs that are for social, for governance. We'll have to have educational programs with this building, community involvement. There is more than 50% of the site that you see here on this image, because it's under construction right now, that it's going to be covered in green space. And it was really not an easy site. It was a municipality-owned site, contaminated along a highway. Really not easy, and that's why it's so special for us. We just reached the top floor last month, so we're quite happy with it. The other thing that we see on this project is the fact that we'll need to, if we want to build projects that are reaching net zero, towards net zero, we'll need to change our habits as well. We couldn't keep the balconies in this building for thermal bridges, so we had to do changes. So it means that the people are used to have balconies. They will have to change their habits. A part of this building is also for affordable housing. So it's a mix between regular apartments and affordable housing. So it ticks different boxes. But for us, it's an example. It's something that we can use as educational purposes. Is it possible to build residential projects that are reaching these high, ambitious goals? Yes, it's an example, but it's not easy. And again, to your question, if we can extend this to the whole company, this is a journey that it's not easy as a journey, ESG, net zero, it costs money. It's not just cost effective. Like we heard it this morning, we have to invest, and we have to convince a lot of people, top management. We have to convince our project managers, our leadership. So it's a journey that we're embarked on because we are convinced it's the right thing to do. It's the right path. It's the path where we have to go. But yeah, it's not like we're not here today. Well, I'm not here today. I don't want to embark you in this statement, but like we're not here today to just paint a rosy picture and say that it's easy to get there.
So a lot of great stuff there around collaboration and trust between the partners. It sounds like that's really crucial. So, Audrina, I'll start with you. What were the various controls that you needed that were outside of the norm for your typical projects, and how did you go about implementing them for this project?
I think maybe I'd like to talk about it more as a culture. I think the controls have to be, and we go back to that word trust and collaboration. There has to be enough structure and also freedom to be able to become innovative. And I think that's really important. Everyone is really amazing at what they do, and I think we have to trust each other on that. And when you bring professionals and people with good experience to the table, you can also listen to the quietest voice in the room because they might have that insight. So creating that option to be able to speak safely, I think, allows people to say, hey, I have an idea. Why don't we try something like this? And that's where you can create those options. And that's where you can create those changes in society, in your governance, in your practice, and how you build. And I think that was one of the biggest controls that we try and implement is culture building and making sure that within your contract, doesn't matter where you are, that there's the contract that you apply to the execution of your job, but there's also the culture that you build. So I think that, for me, was probably the most important prospect. There's other things as well, like, of course, good record keeping, data, lots of backup, information, auditability, all of those things. But that's like, we'll have technological solutions for that in the future, sure. I'll still keep my spreadsheets, but... But for now, I think a lot of it really is to structure your teams, your partners, to a space where you can collaborate well, and that you'll find more outcomes than you ever expected.
With the quietest voice in the room, I really like that. That's good stuff right there. A lot of good ideas come in that quiet voice or after the meeting when someone has some time to think about it, not necessarily during the meeting. Great stuff. Etienne, do you have some perspective on this?
Sure, thanks. So I'm going to give a more technical answer, I guess. So first of all, like, we have to remember ourselves that it's a tough challenge. Like, we have over 200 projects happening at the same time at Pomerleau. We just acquired ITC Construction, a construction company based in Vancouver here. So they have even more projects. So each project is a small company by itself. So, you know, accounting for emissions, for if we want to take scope 1, 2, 3, scope 3 is going to be a real challenge, accounting for all those projects. So we need to have more rigor. We have to have systems that are going to be comparable between each other of these projects. Because going back like to our journey, like scope 1 and 2, it's been 2 years we're reporting on those emissions. Scope 1 is quite easy. I mean, we calculate the fuel that goes in our sites, so we collect the bills. Scope 2, it's easier because we have like few energy providers, but then scope 3, what we're doing right now, we have, two different things. So we have projects where we need to compensate for GHG emissions. So these projects are quite large. The client, it's in the contract, so we need to have to staff them accordingly, and we're following protocols in order to compensate afterwards. So we're learning from that process right now to take into account the scope 3 as a whole for the project. And on a very voluntary basis, there's an initiative that has been promoted internally to compensate, you know, when we build a lead project or passive house project, the construction course is really the phase. It's not taken that much into account. So we wanted to address that part as well. And we created something that we call Green Sites Initiative at Pomerleau. So we have 2 pilot projects right now that are accounting for the whole GHG emissions during the construction phase. And it's really insightful because what can we count to the last number, or what do we estimate? And then it gives us as well like an idea of when and where emissions are produced. So we have, instead of a cash flow, it's like emission flow, and then you can see on a project like course like how many emissions are produced when, and it's going to be very interesting for the next project. So we can actually plan ahead, and just like we're doing scheduling, I guess.
Were there some big surprises when you started tracking like that?
Good
Didn't
question.
put you on the spot.
No. That's a great question because we're still doing the pilot projects. But I would say the first one is to give that communication piece to the client. It's really, really insightful for them. Like in one case, it's an international client, and it's the first time they've seen it, and they're really impressed. They're like, hey, we didn't know that by taking that decision, it would have this impact. Sometimes when we decide to build a project, we don't think about the winter, for example. But like, if we think of the winter and when we're going to pour concrete, perhaps we can change the schedule so we don't pour that much concrete in winter, so we don't have to heat that concrete in the winter. So these are just examples of things we can change over the construction period. And I'm not even talking about embodied carbon here.
Morgan, can you give us some ideas about the controls you had to implement on this project?
Yeah, I think, and I'm trying to come up with the general case. When you're dealing with higher levels of performance, in the old days, a green building, what I call the Kyoto Protocol days, where we were just trying to cut our emissions a little bit, and that lasted for a lot of years. And a green building back then was really, most of the new elements were sat with the mechanical design team. We want more efficient mechanical systems. Now that we are getting into these very high and zero emission buildings, it's a much more integrated solution. You can't solve it, or at least not affordably, with mechanical solutions alone. And so we're seeing much more focus on the envelope, much more focus on thermal bridges. So structure, envelope, mechanical, electrical, architect, builder and subs are all touching the pieces that are very sensitive to the performance outcomes. And so there's new conversations around those interfaces that didn't happen before. So I'm thinking of projects where we would do workshops with the subtrades and the owner and the architect and the engineers all in the same room, long before we were building, to say, how are you going to build that? Does this design work? Let's look at every interface, because airtightness really matters. You've got to get a tight, thermally efficient, non-thermally bridging envelope if you want to make all the rest of this stuff happen. So that was new. We'd never done that before, workshops with the subs. We did much more modeling and then much more validation of the model, like mid-construction air tests. Compartmentalize part of the building and pressure test it. Is the thing you're building actually matching the thing you modeled? Because you're counting on those model numbers to hit the outcomes you want. If the thing isn't matching the model, you've got to mid-course correct, and you don't want to wait till the building's finished, especially if it's a big building, to find out that those material transitions didn't work the way we thought they would. So those were some additional elements that weren't common practice before we started doing very high performance.
Thanks for that. So we've heard a lot of high-level strategy, a lot of compelling information, right? But let's talk tactics a little, lessons. Can you share a particular lesson learned or success story that others could learn from? Morgan, let's start with you.
There's lots. Little things, what sounds small but ended up having a big impact, like a building that wasn't hitting, all this modeling wasn't hitting its performance target. There was no way of getting to it. Rotated at 15 degrees. And the way the sun falls on the building now was going to make it succeed. you can't always do that. Not every lot enables. This happens to be a site that had a lot of space for flexibility, but a little sort of revelatory moment of, oh wait, we can do it. We just have to think differently of what piece we're tweaking in this project. Another small one would be in the when we're doing the validating the design, where we brought those the subs in with the designers, was they actually came up with a recommendation that was a better, more efficient, more cost-effective, higher performance way of seating the envelope in the frame. And it took a crowd of different voices, that idea of like, make sure everyone is heard, because everyone here has a different insight into what's going to work. And I remember the architect saying, will that work? And saying, yeah, well, oh, okay, I wouldn't have drawn it that way because I didn't know the sequence that you were going to undertake to build this thing. But now you're explaining to me what your sequence is. Let's draw it that way. That's way easier. We eliminated parts, we eliminated materials, we simplified. Again, only would have happened through deep collaboration and trust. And there's a zillion examples of stuff like that, but I'll stop with my two.
Audrina.
These were really good too. I think a lot of it, and we haven't started on the buildings yet on that particular project, but there are a number of other buildings we've been looking at, and a lot of it is education. We try and work with the teams to ascertain, what are the priorities? Usually, if we're trying to reach net zero performance, we would have a list of energy conservation measure targets that we would be pursuing, whether it's air tightness, high performance equipment. And we want to be able to balance out and make sure that that message, like these are our priorities and this is how we have to really focus on those goals. And we kind of put the energy to where it is warranted. That way we learn, we train the sub-trades as well. We bring them to the table because they are the masters. They are the people applying the actual physical condition that we have to, maintain and operate for 50, 100 years. If we can identify the key priorities in how we achieve decarbonized buildings, we also build that consciousness in how do we do this in the lowest carbon possible, like the lowest amount of energy use. If we can save money on using diesel, like by going to solar, does that mean we write that into the contract? And that money then can go back into permanent infrastructure. We also had an example, so it was the Prince George Pool. There was a district heating system just within the municipality that we actually connected to. There was about $250,000 worth of diesel that we were preparing for that project cost. But Wes from Cool Air, he was, had this idea and he worked with our team collaboratively. So Subtrade brought a solution to the table. He said, why don't we use that money, build in permanent infrastructure for that building and use it for heating and hoarding. It's free energy. Well, it's not free, but it's more affordable than paying for diesel. Plus it's zero emissions because that heat would have already been in existence. We're just utilizing it and not putting in GHGs, hydrocarbons into the atmosphere. It's a safer environment for our team on site not to have to breathe in all of these hydrocarbons. So we're talking about, the E, S, and G. This takes the whole spectrum, and we shouldn't just focus on energy efficiency. We got to talk about the whole process. And what the outcomes was, the project was now able to have new infrastructure, reduce their ongoing operational costs just for that initial upfront investment. Instead of having to pay for it through diesel, we moved that money into an alternative solution. I thought that was pretty fantastic. I'm just running some numbers now to crunch how much carbon we avoided. But at the end of the day, the owner got a benefit with less money. And those are the sorts of things that sustainability, net zero can actually bring to assets. It's pretty fantastic, pretty exciting stuff.
Very good. Etienne.
It's these are great points, and if I can build on that, like the very fact that to have these priorities in the contract or upfront with the project owner, with the client, it's really important. Like it's similar to say, we want the project to be built faster. We want to reduce the number of things that are going to be built on site. So like that would drive innovation for more prefab, for example. But like when you have these objectives for net zero, for reducing GHG emissions on site, well, I believe that we have a lot of technology available and we have a lot of knowledge available to actually achieve that. It's not a technological problem. It's more a question of leveling the bar for everyone so that the competition can actually compete to the same level. But our message is to say that we're ready to answer these requirements. So it's not rocket science. I mean, it's difficult. It's not easy, but we did it and we can do it again. So that's quite interesting. I also want to add the fact that there are systems. If we go on the field of embodied carbon, new technologies, new materials, we need to go on the field. We need to meet with these new manufacturing companies. Last week, I just met a company. It's called Carbicrete. They produce masonry blocks with no cement. So it's like 100% cement-free. And now they just ramped up the production. They can sell their product since 2 weeks, and they will develop an EPD, and it's going to be ready in a year. But this is one example. And there are a lot more examples on the field. Like we need to put our boots. We need to meet with these suppliers. We need to help them go through this kind of very hard process of going from the good idea or a good idea in the lab, and then when you actually use it on the project. So we need to be ready for it. We need to have contracts that encourage innovation in terms of materials as well. And that don't discourage to use new materials because it's maybe too risky because we have no historical data about that. And maybe one last point, and we discussed about that during lunch. The insurance industry is also a big player in that field. We are collaborating to have more knowledge on these new materials and how we can actually make sure that we're not going to prevent innovation and the use of materials that are going to allow us to build net zero buildings.
Yeah. Quick plug for your local insurance carrier. We want to hear how we're helping, how we're hurting, where we're holding you up. So you've heard it from me. Like you can email me. You can hit me up on LinkedIn. I will absolutely, if I don't have the answer, I'll carry your question to the right person. And we'll make those connections because it's critically important to us that the insurance industry is pulling the right levers to help this transition happen. So we've heard of a lot of good ideas today. And Etienne, you and I over lunch also talked about how entrepreneurial, how individualistic project sites can be as far as how a particular project manager and or superintendent runs their site. So what has been the key to operationalizing these ideas in a way that's meaningful for your whole organization? How do you spread these great ideas? Etienne.
Yeah, thank you. Good question. Every construction site, it's really entrepreneurial. There is a lot of there's kind of a competition aspect to it. So everything that we release, every initiative has to have this kind of, competitiveness. Like we have to prove that this site is going to be different than the other, and then the other one is going to be even a bit better, and then so on and so on. So right now, like that's the way we're going. When we set targets, there are many ways to reach these targets. So we count on knowledge and creativity of our teams to actually reach those. One of our next priority is really to make sure that we communicate in a very detailed way, like in very granular way, our GHG emissions, our results, the different emissions, so that people can actually have a clear view on their impact instead of being just a report for the whole company. So that's really where we're going with that. So this year, for example, like this winter, we released a challenge across the company exactly to reduce our heating demands for all the sites to reduce the fuel demand, and it's a competition. So yeah, there's a contest, there's a price, there's everything, but in the end we all win because there's less GHG emissions.
Audrina?
We actually have a similar gig going on. We actually, Chandos as a company has been tracking waste from our construction sites. Now, we don't really talk about waste very much, but when we talk about embodied carbon, money for projects, if we were to reduce the amount of material used, you could use that money to put into decarbonisation towards your capital asset. But what we do is we actually run a competition to make sure we try and hit 80% waste diversion and facilitate that across the board. So that actually brings about some really interesting things. You learn about the responsibility of a site, the accountability that you need. They learn about what it is that you're targeting because, again, they're very competitive. Well, our site supers especially. But what it does is it comes to a collective goal. And we're an employee-owned company, so actually 60% of our ownership is from our site team. And when they realize that these are our common goals, we actually work together to get to that target. And so waste reduction is just the first step. GHG is where we're building up the next level of awareness and practice. So again, just looking at establishing our baseline and where we are and saying, hey guys, we're seeing this kind of like average performance of this. Now let's set a target to reduce our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, because that's something we can really do now. Scope 3 is a little less tangible. We have to be able to ascertain our accountability on Scope 3 accurately before we start to claim reductions. And that's really important. Right now, it's like, we're still in pixels. We've got the shape, the rough outline of what our GHG emissions are for our corporation. But what we're trying to do is refine it, become accountable for every single carbon element that we have. But really just because the lack of data, we're going to just target the most impactful materials we know. And that's, again, putting the energy and the focus into the things that are priority. And that is like, we're targeting concrete and steel. So we have to know how much we're using, how much we're ordering. Getting our team to understand what that means and maybe asking the question, hey, do we want to use low carbon concrete? Do we want to use recycled steel? What can we salvage from the site? Instead of having a top-down approach, if it comes from the site ingenuity, it happens more often and within their control and then within their own, decision process. So it's kind of really exciting.
That is exciting. Morgan, what do you have to add to that?
I think it comes from three directions: top down, bottom up, and supporting from the side. Top down, our leaders talk about sustainability. It is a core value, whether it's a sort of an annual meeting or a town hall or an operational meeting throughout the year. Our staff are hearing our leaders say the words sustainability, triple bottom line. This is important. So is innovation. Different but similar, that everyone is hearing the message that this is important. We want you to participate in the company in this way. And it's incentivized. We give innovation awards at the end of the year. That's the top down. The bottom up, I think there is an appetite, an ever-growing appetite. People want these projects. They will go out and earn the right to work on them. The high-performance projects are the ones that get talked about for, some of them are legacies. Like, people still talk about projects that were built 10 years ago if they have some special attribute to them. And people know that. They want them on their resume. And then support from the side, we have all sorts of tools like, a lessons learned database, or innovation database, subject matter experts who are there to support you so that you're not just, out in the breeze trying to do this on your own. There is the benefit of the collective memory and mind and experience of your colleagues to guide you on your journey. And I think all those three forces are pulling in a coordinated way. We get really rapid learning and great outcomes.
Wow, really, really great actionable stuff. We've got 2 minutes for questions. Does anyone have a question?
Just you guys are at fairly large GCs. Any advice for small companies that are trying to get this going but don't have the, say, backup of finances that you guys have?
I'm gonna try something. There's something we haven't touched that much in the discussion. It was about like creating tools that are the same across and similar across the industry. Like the fact that when we work with trades or smaller companies, like they also work with Ledcor, they also work with Chandos after or simultaneously on different projects. So there's a real need to have the same kind of reporting and not developing our own tools and our own boundaries for scope 3. And that's really something that we have in mind. So like, the first step is really to better understand like what is your what is your ground? Like what are your boundaries? There are many different ways to assess that. There are subsidies actually with consulting firms that can help you out with this. But really the focus for us, and I assume for most of the companies around, is not to have to develop tools that are going to be really specific to some companies, so we never be able to reach our goals with that.
Yeah, we actually have a really small team. It is a burden on administration costs, right? And your GCs, you don't want to increase it to not be competitive. But what I think has been really interesting is across the industry, like Morgan, we've been on a couple of other, working sessions. We're working with teams like the CAGBC, hi Chantal, also the Canadian Construction Association to try and unify everybody so that we all have a level playing field, because we want to bring everyone together. Like at the end of the day, it's a collective effort, and I think there's going to be a lot more learnings. We're only in testing right now, like we're really new in this game, and so it's the best time to come in and try. And even if you make a mistake, it's okay. And I think it's all right to talk to each other, to build that community and support each other through it, because it is a really challenging thing and our whole industry has to change. So again, there's going to be some really good tools being developed. I'm pretty excited to see them come through. But like, we all live on the same planet with the same climate impacts. So I think there's a collective goal there.
Great point. We are at the end of our time. Please, if you have additional questions we can answer for you, find us, and we'll be happy to talk about them with you one-on-one. Thank you.